Disney's new Star Wars series has mostly been a box office success, well, except for one film. Plagued by numerous production issues, Solo: A Star Wars Story ultimately became the first true failure in the saga's history. That doesn't necessarily mean it was the weakest film, while the others were all great and well received. Though, rumor has it, some people actually enjoy Disney's take on Star Wars. Most likely, Solo simply added its own problems to the franchise's existing struggles and ultimately collapsed under their weight. Each new film in the series made less money than the previous one, a rather unique case that speaks volumes about the so-called professionalism of those managing the franchise. It's quite possible that if there had been 4 films in the main series instead of 3, we would have witnessed yet another box office failure. But, fortunately for Disney, the franchise took a break, remaining only on television where the rise of streaming services provided new ways to manipulate the numbers. Perhaps Solo would have broken every streaming record as well, but it was unlucky enough to be released in theaters, where it's much harder to deceive audiences due to the sheer number of intermediaries. Today, let's talk about the failure of Solo: A Star Wars Story, a film that was only saved from complete disaster by American audiences, who often contribute more to Star Wars box office revenue than the rest of the world combined. When Disney paid the greedy old man a hefty sum for the rights to Star Wars, they immediately set out to recoup their investment as quickly as possible. Their ambitious plans included theme parks, feature films, TV series, animated films, toys, and even video games. They also promised a brand new trilogy, along with spin-offs centered on iconic characters from the franchise. However, the greatness of this new trilogy was questionable from the very first film, thanks to its Oscar-worthy performances and a brilliant script. The situation with the spin-offs was a bit more complicated. For some reason, Rogue One, which borrowed elements from the classic trilogy, was regarded as a kind of benchmark. Yet, in reality, its production values hadn't improved much since Episode 6. The most popular ideas for spin-offs included the destruction of the Death Star and origin stories for Han Solo, Obi-Wan Kenobi, and Boba Fett, the bounty hunter from the original trilogy with a bucket on his head. Apparently, the character holds some significance in the Star Wars universe and was deemed interesting enough to be the lead in his own standalone project. Given the success of The Mandalorian, that decision made some sense. Of these 4 ideas, the Obi-Wan Kenobi spin-off seemed the most promising. According to multiple polls, he was one of the most popular heroes in the saga, often ranking just behind Han Solo. But we're talking about Harrison Ford's Han Solo, which is important, because for obvious reasons, Ford couldn't reprise the role in a spin-off. Obi-Wan, on the other hand, could still be played by Ewan McGregor, who was the perfect age for it. However, rumors suggest that Kathleen Kennedy, who oversees the Star Wars franchise, isn't particularly fond of the character. As a result, the most logical option was set aside, and instead we got yet another story about the Death Star. Then came the Han Solo film, centering on a character whose popularity was largely due to Harrison Ford's performance rather than an exceptional script or groundbreaking direction. When the Solo film was still in early production, the internet quickly found the perfect replacement for Ford, Chris Pratt. Fans suggested him for both Indiana Jones and Han Solo. In theory, he could have been a great fit. However, Disney had other ideas and didn't even consider Pratt for the role. According to rumors, Marvel wasn't thrilled about the idea of their Guardians of the Galaxy star taking on another sci-fi adventure franchise. And honestly, that makes sense. If Chris Pratt had been cast in yet another major space epic, it might have been too much for audiences. Either way, Solo: A Star Wars Story had issues from the very beginning. The new actor was inevitably going to be compared to the original. And let's be honest, problems were nothing new for the Disney-era Star Wars films. Almost every one of them had issues. The only possible exception was Episode 7, though even that film went through reshoots. Even Boba Fett, which never even made it past development, still managed to suffer setbacks. As soon as the disastrous Fantastic Four reboot hit theaters, Josh Trank was booted from the project. Rogue One fell apart during production, forcing the studio to sideline director Gareth Edwards and hand the reshoots over to Tony Gilroy. Then there were issues with Episode 8, which also required reshoots, and finally Colin Trevorrow, who had been developing Episode 9 for a long time, was shown the door, reportedly because his vision for the film was nonsensical. That led to J.J. Abrams returning to the director's chair, where he delivered some truly memorable cinema. So, when Solo ran into its own production troubles, no one was particularly surprised. The filmmakers didn't even see it as a problem. The film was originally directed by Phil Lord and Christopher Miller, best known for 21 Jump Street and The Lego Movie. They've also produced several TV series, including Brooklyn Nine-Nine, as well as animated projects like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. According to Christopher Miller, casting the role of Han Solo was the most challenging task of his career. Over 3,000 actors auditioned, including Miles Teller and Logan Lerman. But in the end, the role went to Alden Ehrenreich. While this choice may seem odd, it actually makes a lot of sense. Ehrenreich was named after director and screenwriter Phil Alden Robinson, a close family friend. Robinson is known for writing Fletch and Field of Dreams and directing The Sum of All Fears. At a party at Robinson's house, Ehrenreich happened to meet Steven Spielberg, who saw great potential in him and immediately helped him find an agent. Spielberg has worked on most of his films with producer Frank Marshall, who is married to Kathleen Kennedy, the person in charge of Star Wars. This doesn't necessarily mean that's exactly how Ehrenreich landed the role, but it's clear he wasn't just some random guy who walked in off the street to audition. Filming began in early 2017, and conflicts on set started almost immediately. The main source of tension was the film's screenwriter, Lawrence Kasdan. Kasdan previously worked as a writer on The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, later contributing to Raiders of the Lost Ark and The Bodyguard. He also directed Dreamcatcher, a film that severely damaged his career. Kasdan blamed the movie's failure on the studio, claiming they stifled his creative vision. Kasdan is the type of screenwriter who insists on being on set every day. During Solo's production, he constantly ran around anxiously, complaining that the directors were making a completely different movie, one where the characters and dialogue barely resembled his script. According to multiple sources, directors Miller and Lord relied heavily on improvisation, resulting in scenes that deviated significantly from the original screenplay. This drove Kasdan crazy, leading him to repeatedly complain to Kathleen Kennedy, with whom he had worked on numerous films. Kennedy would then arrive on set, demand the directors stop messing around, and enforce stricter adherence to the script. For a while, this seemed to work, but soon enough, Miller and Lord would go back to making the film their way. This improvisational approach led to another major issue, one that many believe ultimately pushed Kathleen Kennedy to take action. The directors were severely behind schedule. The studio had planned to complete filming by June 2017, meaning they had 5 months to wrap up. However, by June, it was clear that the project was only 70 to 80% finished, and at their current pace, they would need at least 2 more months to complete it. Rumors about what exactly went wrong vary. Some sources claim the directors were so focused on perfecting the main character that they neglected everything else, forcing the crew into endless overtime. Disney, which initially budgeted $150 million for the film, realized by June that costs were spiraling out of control and would easily surpass $200 million. Lord and Miller repeatedly tried to propose script changes, but all their ideas were rejected by higher-ups. Some believe that's why they became frustrated and simply started filming whatever came to mind. In mid-June, Disney reviewed the existing footage and held screenings for studio executives, including Kathleen Kennedy and Lawrence Kasdan. Shortly after, Phil Lord and Christopher Miller were fired. Per their contract, they were only credited as producers in the final version of the film. No one knows exactly what their version of the movie looked like, but insiders claim it felt more like Guardians of the Galaxy than Star Wars. Some people saw this as a positive, believing the film could have brought a fresh and unique energy to the franchise. However, the phrase, "it felt like Guardians of the Galaxy," is pretty meaningless. People say that about any ensemble-based sci-fi comedy, Before its release, Birds of Prey was compared to Guardians of the Galaxy. Then everyone expected the Suicide Squad to be Guardians of the Galaxy-like. Basically, when a well-loved movie becomes a benchmark, every vaguely similar film gets compared to it. Miller and Lord's quick departure was thanks to Ron Howard, the director behind Backdraft, Rush, Cinderella Man, and A Beautiful Mind. However, there are conflicting accounts regarding how it all went down. Howard insists Miller and Lord were fired before he even arrived. But at the same time, his meeting with Kathleen Kennedy and Lawrence Kasdan was scheduled before the directors were dismissed. So there's plenty of room for speculation. Howard had previously visited the Solo set while Miller and Lord were still in charge. He claims that at first he resisted the studio's pressure to take over the project, insisting he wouldn't direct the film. But after reading the script, he changed his mind, saying it contained everything he loved in a story. Originally, Howard was expected to reshoot 90% of what Miller and Lord had filmed. However, various sources suggest he ended up reshooting between 70% and 85% of the material. Howard claims the studio didn't interfere with his creative vision, and that working on the film was an easy experience. The actors also welcomed him warmly, quickly developing a strong working relationship. The only major setback was Michael Kenneth Williams, who was unable to return for reshoots due to scheduling conflicts. He was replaced by Paul Bettany. By the end of production, the film's budget had ballooned to $275 million. At the time of its release, Solo: A Star Wars Story was the most expensive Star Wars movie ever made. Though a short time later, The Rise of Skywalker caught up, with its budget also reaching $275 million after extensive reshoots. The film premiered in May 2018. Despite its massive $275 million budget, Solo only grossed $392 million worldwide. Many blamed Disney for the failure, accusing them of mishandling the release by throwing it into the crowded May lineup with minimal marketing. American analysts pointed out that the film's real marketing push only began a month before its premiere, far too late for a blockbuster of this scale. On top of that, Solo was forced to compete at the box office against Deadpool 2, Avengers: Infinity War, Jurassic World, Fallen Kingdom, and Incredibles 2. But all these excuses sound pretty weak when you consider that the other 4 Star Wars films under Disney's leadership each grossed over $1 billion. Yet now, the so-called experts leading the franchise claim they were scared of Deadpool 2, a film that made $700 million. Given Solo's failure, Disney quietly shelved another planned spin-off, the Obi-Wan Kenobi Solo film, and instead reworked it into a streaming series where it had a much better chance of succeeding. According to various reports, Disney lost between $100 and $150 million on Solo. These relatively low losses are usually attributed to the film's limited marketing budget. Essentially, the studio was afraid that if they gave Solo a proper marketing campaign, their losses could have reached $200 to $250 million. During production, those involved in the project often hinted that Solo could be the first film in a trilogy about the young smuggler. Later, this excuse was used to justify the differences between Aaron Reich's portrayal and Harrison Ford's version. The idea was that by the third film, we'd finally see Solo become the character we all know. But fate had other plans, and the filmmakers had to settle for just one movie. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned.